I'd now like to welcome to the floor our next and final speaker prior to the panel discussion and roundtable, quickly forthcoming. Swati Chaturvedi, co-founder and CEO of Propel X, who will be sharing insights on reimagining the two I's, innovation and investment in life sciences. Swati, it's a distinct pleasure to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Franco. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, it's nice to be here. Thank you, everyone, for your attention today. It's an exciting time to be in life sciences, and I was listening to the previous speech and would love to connect, of course. But yes, I do believe AI is the future, and actually, I'm going to be highlighting some similar aspects and what's likely to go into life sciences, both in investing and innovation. So let's get started. So I'm really talking about two things, what's changing in investing and what's changing in innovation. I'll try to stay focused. So on investing, I do want to give a little bit of background on myself. So I am the CEO of Propel X. Propel X is an online investment platform. So obviously I believe that investment in startups, in venture capital is going to go much broader than institutions alone. I'll talk more about that. We also run a venture capital fund. It's called Newton Fund. So we are both kind of a VC, but also we run an investment platform. And so we see multiple sides of things. And life sciences is certainly our biggest sector. So let me get started. The brief disclaimer. So reimagining investment. The investment landscape is changing. Let's begin with what some of the largest companies like the Pfizers and the Takedas and Novartises of the world, they're basically outsourcing R&D to startups. And the large companies really have become more of marketing and sales and marketing companies. So what that means is startups have proliferated, and you can see that in how many exits are happening in biotech. So per Biopharma Dive last year, there were 71 biotech IPOs in 2020, each greater than 50 million. So that's really substantial public market activity for life sciences. And the reason we are having so many exits is because there were so many startups to begin with. So there's a lot of startups, and historically venture capital funds alone have been investing in startups. Especially life sciences tends to be a really different kind of risk, and you do need some bit of knowledge about the industry in order to be understanding that risk. But now there are proliferated platforms. There's a lot of platforms out there. It happens so that Propel X is a specialized platform. We focus on what we call deep technologies. And so we focus on deep tech startups, and we find that startup investments have opened up to individual investors, which means that so people of a certain net worth or certain wealth level now have the ability to invest in startups, including life science startups, in their early phases, mid phases, late phases, pre-IPO, and during the IPO. So it is really expanding, and that really is my focus. The point I want to make is that the investment landscape is changing, that individuals are now able to support these companies and invest in these companies early on. So a little bit more about that. And this pertains to what we do at Propel X, because we do enable investments in life sciences. It's our biggest sector by far. And here, we've been covered by major media, and it's an online investment platform where individuals and funds and family offices can buy and sell stakes in startups and venture funds. Life sciences by far is our biggest sector. So we do about 60% of our deal flow, 60% of our dollar flow is in life sciences. We do cover other sectors as well, but life sciences is our biggest sector. And what Propel X enables investors to do is to discover these startups online, to evaluate them. You can participate in investor Q&A, you can have live webinars, etc., and you can invest. It's all an online investment, very streamlined flow. And the best thing is that all offerings are made by a FINRA regulated member, which means a FINRA member. So it's a regulated platform. It is global. web-based, it is affordable. You accept as little as $5,000. And it does solve a lot of information asymmetry. We do curate our own startups and we conduct detailed due diligence on each. So again, the reason I'm making this point is now, today, life science startups are supported by individual investors worldwide. So it's a little bit of a change in mindset, and investing is changing. So what have we done so far? 300 plus startups have been showcased, 100 plus deals have been closed on the PropelX platform. More than 28 million has been invested. We do investments across stages, everything from seed to pre-IPO. Certainly in life sciences, we've done devices, diagnostics, therapeutics across the spectrum. So with that, I mean, that was the main point of how we can reimagine investing. But I do want to focus on what we think is going to change on the innovation side of things. So I am going to focus on personalized medicine. So if we were to reimagine innovation in life sciences, it's going to, the one thing that I'm going to focus on, the one takeaway is personalized medicine. And this goes back a little bit to what was said in the previous speech about the cost of computing and so on and so forth. So I do want to take a little step aside and take a little bit of a look at how the information technology industry evolved, right? So if you look at this chart, shows from the Brookings Institution, it shows the cost of what an iPad 2 would have cost in 2010 dollars over time. So an iPad 2 in the 1940s would have cost the equivalent of about $1 trillion. $1 trillion. It costs now about $200 maybe. So the cost of computing has really come down, right? And now we have a lot of computational power on our fingertips. And at the same time, the power or how many computations are being done per second has really gone up. So if you look again, this is again from the Brookings Institution from the 1980s going all the way to 2010. And these are the number of computations per second in billions. So this has substantially grown. I mean, this is just a logarithmic scale. So it has grown tremendously. We are seeing two things. Cost is coming down, cost of computation is coming down, and the power or how much we are able to compute per second is going up. So we can do more and more at lower and lower cost. What does that mean? At least in information technologies, all of these applications proliferated. You know, Amazon, which analyzes customer data all the time, millions and millions of data points every minute. Facebook, which produces so much of information and analyzes that and serves you up the right kind of information, etc. Twitter, same thing. So why did this happen? It happened because there was a decrease in cost as well as an increase in power. And we see this happening in other industries, including life sciences. Very specifically, I want to look at the cost of gene sequencing. So the cost of gene sequencing has come down. Again, this graph is probably almost more stark than the cost of the iPad that I showed, in that the cost of gene sequencing has come down substantially, enormously. It costs a few $100s now. It used to cost $100 million plus in 2001. Just 2 decades ago. So this is very stark, and this does result in certain implications. We now have more data, more individual data than we ever had before, and the cost of analyzing that data has come down very substantially. So what does that mean? It does imply that since we have so much data on every individual, personalized medicine is going to grow. And we do see that in some of the evidence. If you look at the novel drugs approved by FDA, from 2014 to 2017, more than 20% were personalized medicine drugs. And 42% of all drugs under development as of 2017 were categorized as personalized medicine. So this is the future. And what do we think? What kind of opportunities does this yield? Well, there's going to be opportunities in everything from selecting therapies to to delivering personalized therapies. And it is not just limited to human beings. There are applications of life sciences, of biology, in agriculture, in food, in animals. So all of these areas are going to benefit from the rise in the data that we have and the power to analyze that data. And so I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I'm going to share a couple of examples now, companies that have fundraised on the PropelX platform, but they are operating in these areas. So one of them is ImmuSoft. This is a cell therapy, a combined cell and gene therapy approach. And ImmuSoft has developed something called immune system programming. I'll go into that in a little bit. But essentially, this is a way to reprogram a patient's own cells to fight disease, own B cells to fight disease by producing therapeutic proteins. ImmuSoft has received funding from major VCs, including the Peter Thiel's Founders Fund, as well as PropelX investors. And they just signed an agreement with Takeda for a collaboration with potential value up to $900 million if all milestones are met. So just taking a quick look, as I said, this is about personalized medicine. So the goal, remember, is to deliver protein therapeutics by reprogramming the patient's own cells. So the way this works, there's this 6-step process. You collect the patient's blood, and you select and purify the B cells, which really are the precursors to the plasma cells. And then they have a proprietary gene delivery mechanism whereby you infuse engineered DNA into these cells, and then you expand and differentiate the cells and infuse them back into the patient. And once engrafted back, these programmed cells then produce the therapeutic proteins around the clock, for extended periods of time. So again, this is a combined gene and cell therapy approach, but this is really focused on personalized medicine. It does leverage all of these advancements in data production and analytics, really. So this was one example of what we see growing more and more in the future, a lot of personalization and efficiency. Another example I do want to give, which is not in human life sciences, but as I mentioned, applications range far beyond just humans alone. The applications are in animals, in food and drugs, in agriculture, and so on. So another company that we helped finance was a company called Aromics. Aromics is digitizing the sense of scent or smell and taste, right? And how do they do it? There have been many different approaches to digitize the sense of smell, but nothing has been really successful. So what the approach that Aromics is taking, they're trying to replicate the human receptors. So in our nose and in our palate, there are about 400 receptors for sense and smell, and every receptor, depending on, let's say you're at a Starbucks or a coffee place, and depending on the aroma of the coffee, specific receptors become activated to a different extent. And so what Aromics is doing is replicating these receptors on a 400 well plate, and you can then, when the specific smell wafts past, you can determine which of the receptors was, there are certain changes in the receptors which can then be read using standard PCR technology, and you can determine which receptors were activated to what extent. And this way you can actually develop an aroma graph. So what Aromics has developed is something called an essence chip, which has all these receptors on a plate, and these can then be activated in the presence of a different smell or flavor and so on. So again, this is a foundational technology because this tells us how we can replicate certain expensive perfumes, fragrances, using cheaper materials, or certain flavors like salt, while using non-harmful ingredients. So these are some applications which take advantage of this advancement in computing power, essentially. And that was the key point. What we see in the innovation coming forward is advancements that leverage the growth in computing power and the reduction in computing costs. So with that, I will wrap up. My 15 minutes are up. So thank you. If you're interested in companies like this, join us at propelx.com, and happy to answer questions after this. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Swati.